Ashley Beedle, ma soprattutto Tim Lawrence e Joe Thomas, un reading e un DJ set in omaggio ad Arthur Russell, un artista che tutti stanno imparando ad apprezzare ora, paradossalmente a diversi anni dalla sua scomparsa, proprio per il suo eclettismo musicale, la sua ecletticità e la capacità di anticipare i tempi. Violoncellista ma anche grande produttore disco, un personaggio che a cui ELITA è dedicata sostanzialmente nel suo essere un programma a 360 gradi su tutti i generi musicali.
One more.
Cool. Initially, the Flying Hearts start to send around their music, and the record company bosses are saying, look, this guy's voice is in trouble, he can't sing very well. And yet, when I first started listening to his voice, there was something almost, he has an unusual voice, and there was a difficulty of kind of digesting that voice. And now I listen to that voice, and it's kind of, it's kind of jazz-like, it's fluid, it's confident, it's very intimate, it's personal. It's one of the most incredible voices, I think, in music. When we hear Arthur's voice, we can hear it's Arthur Russell music. But there's something around a lot of the rest of his music that's quite uplifting, but it keeps on moving in tangents. There's very rarely an obvious structure. There's very obvious a kind of linear direction to the music. It's always about seeking the possibility of moving in a new direction. I mean, this is what we hear in a lot of his music.
What if? The rude but necessary question is why, in your opinion, he wasn't more successful when he was alive?
Well, he wasn't successful when he was alive because he kept having these relationships with record companies that would get interested in him. They would see that kind of Arthur Russell had this kind of ingenious quality, that he was kind of quite brilliant at what he did, and they would start to kind of go down kind of the road with kind of recording with him, and then they would say that they would need him to just do one thing, that they would want him to discipline himself to create one sound, because then they could give him an identity and they could market that identity. And of course, this is, for example, what John Hammond wanted to do with him. John Hammond, who had just discovered Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen, finds Arthur Russell and invites Arthur Russell in the studio to basically do what Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan did with him, which is to strum some kind of songs on the guitar and to kind of create this sense of like authentic folk rock hero. And Arthur was very excited to have met John Hammond, to have this opportunity with basically the most powerful man in the music industry at that particular moment. But instead of going in and doing what John Hammond wanted him to do, he brought in all this extraordinary range of musical friends, some of whom came from kind of proto-punk bands, some of whom were kind of orchestral composers and musicians. And he brought them in to create this kind of strange amalgam of folk music and orchestral music that brought this all together. And he didn't do it to kind of upset John Hammond. He did it because he thought this was like, John Hammond would hear this music and think, yes, this is the future of music, I really want to sign this. Because John Hammond didn't want this, because the music wasn't immediately recognisable. There was no way for him to market Arthur Russell and all of these
New Bruce Springsteen,
exactly. So, and this is just one example of what Arthur would do again and again and again. The record companies would think, yes, we can capture Arthur and we can get him to record one sound. And Arthur would say, no, I don't want to just record one sound. And there's another kind of classic moment in his life when he joined this new wave band called The Necessaries, who were signed to Sire, which was the band that signed kind of groups like Talking Heads. And so they were, the most powerful new wave label in New York at that time. There was great hope that The Necessaries could become the next Talking Heads. And Arthur they went on tour and they were going to play in Washington, and they got in their tour bus and they were driving off and they approached the Holland Tunnel, which is the symbolic exit of New York. And as they approached the Holland Tunnel, Arthur Russell said, no, I've got to get out. And he opened the door and he grabbed his cello and he basically jumped out of the tour bus. And the rest of the band were left to go to Washington, and one of his best friends, Ernie Brooks, who was in the Wild Combination film, says that, he really wanted he met up with Arthur a few days later. Arthur said, "I'm really sorry, Ernie, but for the good of me and for the good of the band, I had to get out." And Ernie Russell decked him, and they had a kind of physical fight. And to me, it was all about Arthur couldn't bear the prospect of just being in a kind of rock band, going on tour with that rock band and making the same kind of music again and again and again for the rest of your life. I mean, he would rather kill himself than live that kind of existence. And I have to say, on some level, I relate to that kind of ethos, that kind of outlook. He wanted to be open and he wanted to be pluralistic. He wanted to be hybrid. He wanted freedom. He didn't want restriction. And it's very hard within rock culture in particular to have freedom. And so this is why he didn't become famous. Sorry, too many tangents to this question, but because he refused to discipline himself in the way that the music industry wanted him to discipline himself, presenting a strangely coherent left-field sound that hinted at genre yet remained steadfastly unnameable. 24 to 24 music could only have been developed by an artist who was embedded in the full range of downtown's diverse music scenes, which is to say, it sounded like an Arthur Russell album.
That was Tim Lawrence and Joe Thomas presenting excerpts from the book that Tim Lawrence has written, Arthur Russell, about Arthur Russell, called Hold On To Your Dreams. And I'm Ashley Beedle, and I'm going to be DJing some music later, some Arthur Russell stuff, and some things I think Arthur could be connected to.